Good afternoon to one and all. I'm Dr. Saravanan, consultant neonatologist at Rainbow Children's Hospital, Bannerghatta Road. On behalf of Rainbow Children's Hospital, I welcome you all for this perinatology meet. Well, when we thought what is the topic we can have, we thought we shall have some day-to-day cases which we usually have trouble in making a decision. So along with me, we have Dr. Ambika, Senior Consultant in Obstetrician at Rainbow Children's Bannerghatta. Welcome, madam.
Hello, thank you, Doctor. Good afternoon.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Ambika here from the birth rate team, Rainbow Hospitals. So, as Dr. Saravanan told, we are here to discuss few challenges which we face in the day-to-day practices. Because sitting and discussing about guidelines or things is what we do every day, but the case scenarios is what we come across every day. So, let us go on with that.
In this era of evidence-based medicine and medical legal litigations, saving the baby as well as neurodevelopmental outcomes becomes important. So all the case scenarios here also stresses on the neurodevelopmental outcome of the fetus and the newborn neonate. Dr. Ambika, you can see the case, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes.
So here,
this is one of the cases which we encountered. Was a preemie who was conceived through IVF. And at 26 weeks, she came with leaking PV since 2 hours. The speculum examination also showed the same. So, Dr. Ambika, so at this point of time, what are the tests will you ask to monitor the mom as well as will you admit the mother?
Yes. So coming to the case scenario, she is a preemie gravida with an IVF conception. Again, as we have been talking on the IVF pregnancies, it does not mean that IVF pregnancies have a different management. The management of pregnancy during the 9 months is the same as a regular pregnancy on an overall basis, keeping her obstetric history in mind. And she's come with a leak, and the leak is confirmed through a speculum examination. So the diagnosis of PPROM is confirmed. Whenever there is no leak on per speculum examination, there are other tests which are done. For example, placental amniotic fluid or the insulin-like growth factor, which we usually test on the vaginal examination, vaginal fluid. But when the speculum examination shows a confirmed leak, we diagnose it as a PPROM, which is 26 weeks, sir, is what I saw that. 26 weeks.
Yes, 26
so it's 26 weeks PPROM. What are the tests? We have to do her basic clinical examination regarding her fever, any other discharge, whether she has pain or not, and the fetal heart monitoring. Plus, we have to ask her total counts and the CRPs. These are the two most important tests we usually do. And the next thing we would do is a ultrasound examination to look in for the amniotic fluid. Whenever we check the amniotic fluid on the ultrasound, it has to be a single vertical pocket. We don't usually measure the 4 pockets and then add on to it. The single vertical deep pocket is the clear-cut measurement which gives the Likert measurements. Second questions. Do you admit the mother? Whenever it's a diagnosis of PPROM, it does not mean that we have to admit the mother every time. So an expectant management can be done as the Green Top guidelines. But yes, we have to tell the mother and the family about the monitoring. That means to look in for a clinical signs what she might develop. A clinical signs of chorioamnionitis like any fever, abdominal pain, vaginal discharge, and is she able to look into these changes, any decrease in the movements and all these features, and how is her support at home and how soon she can reach the hospital. These are the important factors which we consider when we can allow her for an expectant management, not admitting her at home. If this is all not possible, then yes, she has to be admitted definitely. Next, this is the usual thing we come into picture, diagnosis and the tests and then the admission. Next question is, how frequently do we monitor them? Whenever we have admitted, we usually have to monitor them, bi-weekly on all these parameters, the CRP, total counts, and the temperature, vitals, and all that. Any changes, the monitoring has to be much more frequent. This has to be monitored on the early obstetric warning charts. So we have to monitor them and accordingly treat them eventually on the scan and the rest of the parameters. The next question which is usually asked is antibiotics. PPROM, what antibiotic to be given, how long to be given, and whether it's safe or not. The recommended antibiotic for PPROM is erythromycin, given in the dosage of 250 milligrams four times a day, that is 6th hourly, for 10 days or till she delivers. This is the recommended dosage which has to be given. There are other schools of thought whether cephalosporins can be given or augmentin, coamoxiclav can be given. As per the guidelines, augmentin is not recommended because there is an increased chance of necrotizing enterocolitis. So it's not the preferred antibiotic. So the preferred one is the erythromycin, which is recommended. Then the usual thing, what next? Antibiotic we've given her, we are monitoring her. Do we give them steroids? I think sir is the best person to tell about the steroid dosages, what to do, what not to do, and all that.
Yeah, so when it comes, actually all neonatologists love steroids, and in this case scenario, chorioamnitis is one thing which all neonatologists dread. Okay, because chorioamnitis in vitro can lead on to very poor prognosis in terms of neurodevelopmental outcome. So if this mother slowly progresses into clear-cut chorioamnitis, then it is better that the baby comes out. So if the baby is going to come out, we have to be more prepared. So the guidelines say that any fetus beyond the 24 to 34 weeks, we can give a dose of steroids, provided the obstetrician anticipates that the delivery will happen in the next 7 days. Here the crux is important because the steroid dose works for the next 7 days. So it is not that, okay, anytime we have a little doubt, we don't end up giving steroids, but we have a strong suspicion that in the next 1 week, the mother may go into full-blown chorioamnitis where you may have to deliver the baby. Then it's always safer to give the first dose of steroids. And you can give either dexamethasone or betamethasone, but what we should avoid doing is that giving repeated doses of steroids within weekly intervals. So if you're going to give repeat doses, it's going to be 2 weeks later only. So in this baby, if the mother, if the obstetrician expects that, okay, in the next few days, she may go in for chorioamnitis, it's better off you give the first dose of steroids. I again stress, steroids are not just for the lung development. It plays a huge role in the maturation of the cerebral blood vessels, which in turn prevents intraventricular bleeds, because this is more common in 26-28 weekers. So it's more imperative that you be proactive when you're going to give steroids in these 25, 26, 27, 28 week windows. So steroids I would recommend in this baby.
Yes, sir. On an overall basis, the average time from the PPROM to delivery is the latency, what is usually told. Between around 26 to 30, 32 weeks, it's usually told 8 to 10 days is the latent period. So by that time, they usually deliver. And again, beyond 32, 33 weeks, it's the 5-6 days. So most often a repetition might not be required of steroids. Even when we do an expectant management as well also, they mostly go into labor is the studies.
That's a very good point. So that it's the obstetrician's intuition which will guide you, okay, this may deliver in a week or 10 days. And based on that, you take a decision of steroids, which is very, very important. If you're referring to somebody else also, you can give the first dose of steroids and refer to a tertiary care center, definitely.
Very much so. And again, at every point, all these is all discussed with the patients and the family, because what is the advantage, what is the disadvantage, do you want to do this, if it is not given, this is the disadvantage, so it's better to take is what we tell them and administer accordingly. So yes, back to the patient.
So the same patient, now it's at 26 weeks, and as madam had requested, they have done a CRP which is 12, a normal reading of 10, less than 10. Total count is 12,000 and a platelet of 2.1 lakhs. They have done an ultrasound abdomen which shows an amniotic fluid index of 11 with the Dopplers normal. So Dr. Ambika, at this point.
Yes. So the previous slide, for example, all the parameters has been normal. She's not had fever. The fetal heart monitoring is all. There is no fetal compromise. CRP is slightly raised. The normal which we take as a 10, and total count is 12,000, which is still normal. Up to 16,000 in pregnancy is normal. Platelets are fine. AFI is still 11, not oligohydramnios. So we monitor them here. We are not planning for the delivery at this point of time because this is the expectant management. We still go on because PPROM delivery, has been the notion before, which is not true. We have to monitor them. We have to do the parameters, and when the necessity of the delivery comes, is when we have to take a call on the delivery. Yes.
So 4 days
Next.
later, the mother comes now, she's now 26 plus 4 days, and now she has a spike of fever. And now the CRP has gone up to 16 and a total count of 15,000. So, madam, do we deliver the baby now? And do we get a neonatologist involved?
Dilemma starts. Yes. So there is a spike of fever. The CRP is raised further. It was 12 3 days before, and then now it's 16. And total counts also is started to raise. So the chorea amnionitis is setting in. So here is when, yes, we can take a call for the delivery or do a daily monitoring of things. And suppose if she settles, the fever is still okay, it is settling down with the antibiotic and all that, the next day CRP is not raised further, and yes, we have to have time to give steroids also for the 24 hours and discuss with neurologists and take a call. Here at this point, we can wait for one more day is what we can think, or deliver if the patient, according to the discussion, if they want the delivery, yes, we can deliver them. Yes, next
So,
is
you'll want
mother
them
has
in
one
hospital.
spike of fever. Yeah.
You'll want them in hospital at this point of time, right?
Yes, definitely. Yes, sir. Whenever there is signs, any minimal signs of chorioamnionitis, we have to admit them to the hospital because yes, chorioamnionitis, neonatal outcome, we'll have to discuss. We have to monitor them. Fetal compromise, we have to see, and the scans we have to do.
So definitely
Next.
the mother is going to be in the hospital. A neonatologist is going to get involved.
Yes.
And she's going to be under strict monitoring.
Definitely.
So
Yes,
3
because
days
the
later,
discussion. Yes, sir.
3 days later, she's having more higher fever spikes of 1 or 2. FH is still good. The fluid index has reduced to 7 and CRP is started to rise up. And the total count is now 21,000.
Yeah. Do we?
So
Yes,
at this
I
point,
think
madam,
this point we are going to deliver the neonate, or if we have still not given the magnesium sulfate, then maybe we may wait for one more day to give magnesium sulfate. Otherwise, at this point we are delivering because there are the spikes which have started going high, the Liker has started dropping, neutrophils has raised, CRP has raised, so we deliver them at this point of time. What is the role of magnesium sulfate, sir? I mean, how do we look into that?
Magnesium sulfate is a medicine which is used age old, but they found that after using this, they found the neurodevelopment outcomes, especially in babies less than 28 weeks, were good. So now the recommendation is any mother who delivers less than 30 weeks, we should give a dose, 4 grams, a stat dose followed by 1 gram per hour over the 24 hours. Even the stat dose and starting at least for 6 hours has good neurodevelopmental outcome in terms of preventing periventricular leukomalacia. Now,
Yes.
this periventricular leukomalacia is one thing you can pick up in the scan in a newborn period, but usually the trouble is evident by the end of 1 year of life. So it's not a trouble which immediately is seen when the baby is born. So it's imperative that obstetricians always consider magnesium sulfate if there is an imminent labor less than 30 weeks. But at the same time, if it is in full-blown chorioamnionitis where you're going to have tough time, sometimes if you're completed steroids, you can start the magnesium sulfate. Even for 6 hours you give and you can deliver the baby. But stress on magnesium sulfate. Now, how do we deliver
to be given for 24? Yeah, the dosage, please, 24 hours or 6 hours
4
is
grams
enough.
Stat dose followed by 1 gram per hour for the next 24 hours.
Like we typically give the Suspan regimen for the same dosage, 4 gram plus 1 gram, 24 hours. And suppose she is around 32 weeks, do we give them magnesium sulfate?
So 30 to 34 is a gray zone where it is not imperative we have to give. Less than 30, it is definite. 30 to 32 weaker, depending on case-to-case basis, we can decide about giving magnesium sulfate.
So as sir clearly told, if we are planning to deliver only is when we are going to give magnesium sulfate. It is not that we are doing an expectant management and waiting for another 1 week or 10 days. We're not planning to give magnesium sulfate. Yes, sir?
Yes, there is no role for repeat of magnesium sulfate. Steroids you can think about, but magnesium sulfate is going to be just before the delivery. It's imminent preterm labor. That's when you're going to think about the magnesium sulfate.
True, because there is no role of repetition or give magnesium sulfate once at 29 weeks, again repeat at 32 weeks. No, there is no role on that. So what is the mode of delivery? Mode of
Yes.
delivery here with the chorioamnionitis with a small baby less than 30 weeks now here. I don't think there is any role of induction. Induction of delivery comes into picture whenever there is PPROM, there has been an expectant management. She's crossed 34 weeks is when a question of a induction or a vaginal delivery comes. Here we will have to do a cesarean section. Yes, sir. So
So
here
whenever
come
it's,
few questions. Yes, sir. The
yeah,
counsel
I
is
mean,
the
whenever
biggest
it's less
part.
than 28 weeks, the parents are quite skeptical. Two things. One is about the survival of the baby. Next is about the long-term neurological outcome. And
Very
especially
much.
when we are going to subject them to a cesarean, it's always important we get the neonatologist involved so that the parents are aware what they are going to encounter. So that would give them the confidence that, okay, it's worth going through. So how do we counsel the parents is we take a shared decision making. That is, we give the information, that is the international data, as well as the data from our own unit. So we take the parents through our neonatal unit so that they can see how are the baby's outcome, and we introduce them to the other parents who share their experience. That's called shared decision making, so that the parents' decision is not just the neonatalist's opinion, it's they're going to take the opinion of many parents as well as the statistics from international as well as our own unit. So the American statistics says that any baby more than 24 weeks we can do resuscitation. So it's 22 to 24 is when the gray zone. So more than 24 weeks they do well. But this is an American data, whereas when it comes to a Indian data, any baby beyond 25 weeks do well. But here the risks of neurodevelopment delay is also based upon the risks of intraventricular hemorrhage. It's not just a 25-weeker or 26-weeker which will decide the
It's
neurodevelopmental
not just
outcome.
the gestation age.
It
It's
is
the
a
other parameters also.
multifactorial. So does it have an intraventricular bleed in the first day? Does it develop a periventricular leukomalacia? Does it develop sepsis? So these are all the factors which will decide the outcome. So this is just a diagrammatic representation which we give to all parents. If you see the red box here, babies who cross 25 and above, we find that 3 in 10 babies die. So 70% of babies survive. Out of the 7 who survive, 1 may have a severe disability. So the crux is 60% to 70% survive with no severe disability, which is good number. Whereas once they come to 26 weeker, only 2 die, out of which 1 may have a, so 70 to 80% survive with intact neurodevelopmental. So we give this pictorial representation to the parents, which helps them to take a more shared decision making, which they are more optimistic on that. So this is one thing I would stress to all the observation also. So what are the precautions prior to delivery? Definitely a in utero transfer to a unit which has a good neonatal setup, or at least a neonatologist who can handle the delivery. So in utero transfer is ideal. As we already stressed, antenatal steroids, antenatal magnesium sulfate, and very, very important is the delayed cord clamping. Well, delayed cord clamping, I would say, is a responsibility of a neonatologist, because the neonatologist has to give the confidence to the obstetrician, madam, you can wait, take at least 1 minute to 2 minutes before clamping the cord, because the neonatologist would know how the baby is rather than telling the obstetrician don't clamp. So neonatologist should tell that the baby looks fine, let's wait on the cord clamping. So delayed cord clamping goes a long way in preventing intraventricular hemorrhage, and the extra bit of blood prevents shock as well as anemia later for the baby. So delayed cord clamping is a must in most smaller the baby.
I think
So
this
the
has to be
last
stressed
one,
on an overall basis, even at the time of term deliveries also, sir. This delayed cord
yes,
clamping, I think, has to be stressed in a bigger way on for all the obstetricians, because it
in fact,
definitely helps
when
all
it
the
comes to
neonates.
when it comes to a term baby, the concept is called as zero separation. The concept of zero separation. That is, the baby is born, don't clamp the cord, put the baby on the mummy's tummy, then wait for the cord pulsation to settle down. So it takes sometimes up to 3 minutes, you can wait. Then you clamp the cord there and the baby crawls to the breast and starts feeding. That's called the concept of zero separation. That's how it has to be done when it comes to a term baby.
True, very
Okay.
much true.
So when it comes to a preterm baby, especially this baby who's a 27-weeker with chorioamnionitis, the golden hour is most important. That is first 1 hour in the delivery room that plays an important role in the long-term neurodevelopmental outcome, because the parents should not just think that, okay, it's a 25-weeker, it's not going to do well. But a 25-weeker, the first hour is doing well. That is, we ensure that there's a delivery room CPAP, because if we try to use a bag and mask, they may bleed inside the brain. Now, that's going to impact your long-term neurodevelopmental outcome. Targeted oxygen therapy, that is, in some unit, they tend to give too much of oxygen. Now, that's going to impact your brain development later on. Baby gets cold. So, as you can see from the picture, this is a transport ventilator which has an incubator in that. So, temperature stabilization plays a huge role in neurodevelopment outcome. And all this is with a good team effort. So, if you get a good neonatal team and ensure that the first golden hour goes smoothly, these babies do well. Okay, so that's the most crux of that golden hour, and it's the obstetrician who have to tell the parents as well as ensure that a neonatal team is available at the point of delivery. Okay.
Yes,
So
because
that's about
it has to
this
be a
baby.
prior information, a planned delivery, and the neonatologist has to be there in the operation theater itself to do all these things rather than delivering and then calling them.
Exactly. Okay, so this baby. So next gets to the next case,
Let's get
which
on to the next
also
piece.
many parents do encounter this. So this is a primee, a 32-year-old mother, 32-year-old primee. Pregnancy is
Primary doctor.
confirmed in 8 weeks by ultrasound. So at 12 weeks they are done. Madam, I think you can see the numbers. So what do you feel
Yes.
about these reports here?
Yes, so the scan is showing a 12 weeks, 3 days. NT is 1.1, which looks okay. Nasal bone is present. For a 12-week scan, this looks okay. So the age-wise risk for the first time screening, down screening comes to 1 in 755. These numbers look okay. The last thing, double marker at 10, 12 weeks is inconclusive. Whenever a report is like this, it's either that the double marker has been done maybe prior to the NT was done, or the gestational age or the parameters what they've taken might not be normal. So as such also the double marker test has to be given as low risk or high risk. Inconclusive double marker test cannot be predicted. So we have to, if it is still within the zone of repeating a double marker test, we can repeat the double marker test after an NTNB has been done. Or if it has crossed that 13 weeks window, then we can do a quad test at 16 weeks. As it also, the one more thing I want to stress is there was a triple marker which was being done. The 14 weeks double marker is showing high risk. They do a triple marker test at 14 weeks, 3 days, and all that. Triple marker test does not have a role. It has been obsolete at present. This is one thing which has to be stressed, sir. Triple marker, don't do the triple marker test at all. Next,
So the crux is double marker should either give us low or high risk. No labs or any place should give us an inconclusive. So we have to ensure that they put the right place at the right time also.
Place and the right time. So yes, definitely it is very, very important for the gynecologist and to the scan person to calculate at 8 weeks when they do the double marker and the NT scan, because patients definitely might get confused. So we have to stress them that this is the time you have to do an NT scan, because usually they do what we tell them is do it the first week of October, they do it in the second week of October. That is the usual thing patients might turn out to be. So we have to stress them the importance of the timing for the NT scan and the double marker, and what is the importance of down screening, because the first trimester screening is very, very important. On an overall basis, they understand the importance of anomaly scan on the patients. 20-week scan is important, is what they usually know. But the first trimester screening, what is the importance of NT scan, what is the importance of double marker test, what is Down syndrome, has to be educated there. We have to tell them at the 8-week scan itself, so they know this is important and they do it and get back to us at the right timing, so we have the time for the further testing if required. Yes, so then they've done the 16 weeks, most likely the quadruple marker scan. Metal serum biochemistry, AFP is 0.9. So the MOM less than 1 is normal, less than 1 is something abnormal is what it's showing. Beta HCG 1.9 is what the report shows, so which is high. Beta HCG again has to be 1. More than 1 beta HCG, high beta HCGs indicate towards a down screening. So the Down's risk as per the second trimester biochemistry is 1 in 119 is what the report shows. So she's come under high risk for Down syndrome. What do we tell them? As I told just now, they have to understand what is Down syndrome and what is the importance of the screening tests. We have to tell them screening tests and the diagnostic tests. Now, whenever the screening test is shown high, we do the next test, which is a invasive test or a non-invasive test. As the question here, what advice do we give the parents? So the next thing they have to do is now she is 16 weeks, do a detailed structural early anomaly scan with a fetal medicine person, fetal medicine consultant, so that we know is there any structural abnormality or there is no structural abnormality. If there is any signs of structural abnormality, it is better to do a invasive testing like an amniocentesis is what we tell them. If there is no structural abnormality, then yes, we can advise them the NIPT, because NIPT again is a screening tool. It is not a diagnostic test. NIPT is supposed to be 99% sensitive. It's not 100%, 99% plus. So it's a good percentage, but still it's a screening test. It's not a diagnostic test. So whenever a structural abnormality is there, whenever we have to confirm, it is the amniocentesis we suggest them. But there are risks of amniocentesis. What are the risks associated? There is a chance of 1 in 200% chance of a miscarriage by amniocentesis per se, or a slight chance of infection. So which we need to tell them. It's an informed decision. Again, the patient and the family is taking the decision whether they want to do an NIPT or a invasive testing. So a discussion has to be elaborate and the interpretation has to be told to them, rather than telling them that, oh, Down syndrome is come at high risk, this is this, and you have to terminate the pregnancy. No, that is not the way. They have to understand the scenario completely. It's very, very important. So I think these are what are the other options? How reliable is NIPT? NIPT is 99%, sir. So as such also, if the NIPT comes as high risk, so that is the other thing. NIPT comes as low risk, then we do a anomaly scan at 19 weeks plus, and then do serial scans accordingly. If NIPT comes as high risk, then invasive testing, confirmative testing has to be done before they think that Down syndrome is positive and think for termination if they want.
So you give the parents the option of amnio versus NIPT, but even if NIPT is high risk, you again go for the amnio.
Yes, sir. Definitely, yes.
So I think this parents finally opted for the amnio, which showed that the baby has no aneuploidy.
So the Downs was negative, the chromosomes were normal. So then they do the next further scan, serial scans and all that. And
Yes.
as such also the low PAP. Yes, sir. So coming to the next things.
Yeah, so unfortunately, and then so once the first trimester screening and the trisomy screening was done, the mother again comes at 29 weeks as per her dates, and again she has a few trouble in her scans. What do you think about this scan, madam?
Yes, so this scan, she's 29 weeks now. The scan is showing 26 weeks. So there is a 3-week delay in the growth parameter, the 3 weeks difference. All the parameters are less than first centile, which diagnoses the fetal growth restriction. It comes to FGR now. So the Leica is moderately reduced. Then the Dopplers have been done, which is showing a high resistance flow. The ductus venosus flow is normal. Bilateral uterine is showing a high resistance. So this fits in for an early onset IUGR now. So when do we repeat the ultrasounds and Dopplers? So we have diagnosed the early onset IUGR. There are some Doppler changes. What do we do now? Ultrasounds and Dopplers have to be repeated. Ultrasounds for the fetal parameters for the growth is repeated at 2 to 3 intervals. Dopplers are repeated. The umbilical artery Dopplers have to be repeated every 2 weeks if it is normal. In the third trimester, there is no role for the uterine artery Dopplers. Uterine artery Dopplers are important at 20 weeks to detect a very early onset IUGR if there is an indication, high risk for IUGR in terms of the maternal characteristics or a low weight or malnourished women. Whenever she fits in for a monitoring, 20 weeks, there is a role for uterine artery Doppler. At third trimester, we monitor the umbilical artery Dopplers. Umbilical artery Dopplers, if they are normal, we repeat it at weekly or 2 weekly intervals, fortnightly intervals. If they are abnormal, if they start becoming abnormal, then we do it bi-weekly. I mean, twice in a week, and we also start doing the MCAs and the ductus venosus. If there is absent or the reversal of the umbilical artery Dopplers, then we have to look in for the ductus venosus. If the ductus venosus, what is the ominous sign? Ductus venosus showing abnormality, that is an ominous sign. Absent or the reversal of the umbilical artery Doppler plus the ductus venosus are the ominous signs. So the Dopplers are the ones which are guiding us how to monitor this patient with the FGR. Because as such also the fetal parameters, and there is so much about the CTGs and the BPPs and all that. BPPs at this point of time cannot detect things because in early onset IUGR, the nervous system is not developed so much that we interpreted BPP as to detect how do we deliver them. So the Dopplers are the prime importance when we, which help us in the decision making for the timing of the delivery. So the next question is, do we need to give steroids to the mother? Yes, sir. Steroid is yours on.
Yeah. So at this point, do we need to give steroids to the mother? Now we are talking about 26 weeks, but compared to an
She's
IUGR
29 weeks, but
monitoring,
actually it's showing
29
26 weeks.
26
29
weeks as well. So now when it comes to a chorioamnitis, as madam had told, maximum they do go in for labor or deliver by 8 to 10 days. Whereas in IUGR, we got more strict monitoring parameters where you can watch out for the signs of fetal hypoxia and deliver it. The crux of any steroid is that they work for the first 1 week, and very important is there's no, I mean, you don't repeat it every week. So probably 29 weeks, I may wait for the next week to see if how the Dopplers are progressing.
Yes, Dopplers. Because at this point of time, the umbilical artery Dopplers are still normal, ductus venosus flows are normal. So we can wait for the next week Dopplers to see how things are and then take a call. Now, yes,
So,
whenever
at this
it
point,
comes to an
individual will
IUGR,
get
there's
involved.
always a discussion which
Yes, madam. Yeah.
has to be with the neonatologist, because we have to have a counseling for the parents with the neonatologist, because we are expecting an early delivery at 29 weeks. If she's showing 26 weeks, it's unlikely that she might go in for a 37 weeks, 38 weeks. So they have to understand what they're expecting, when they're expecting the delivery. It's early, late, and the next, planning accordingly.
So a repeat course is usually indicated if we have given 1 dose and 2 weeks later, if you're not crossed the 34 weeks, then a single repeat course can be recommended. That is, there should be minimum 2 weeks apart. And if we have not crossed the 34-week mark, that is when we give 1 single repeat course. But many studies say that a repeat course of steroids can per se have long-term neurodevelopmental issues. The baby can have a microcephaly, and more steroids per se can make the baby small, and long-term height of the baby may get hampered. So repeat course is always after explaining to the parents what all are the risks involved, and definitely not more than 1 single repeat course of steroids is recommended.
So only 2 doses is what is given. Definitely not the
Yes.
third repeat course, even if she crosses 34 weeks or whatever it is. That's what you mean. And
Exactly.
if suppose the second dose of steroid is not given, what is the advantages and disadvantages, sir? Suppose we have given her 29 weeks 1 course of steroids.
Yes. Yes.
Now she's crossed 31 weeks now, 2 weeks the Dopplers are holding on. She's 32 weeks now, and the parents tell we don't want a second dose of steroids. What is the disadvantage?
Yeah, so when it comes to an IUGR, the chances of maturation of the lung of the baby is little better. So when we are dealing with an IUGR, we don't need to stress too much on the steroids as a second dose, definitely, because an IUGR per se has a chance of cerebral redistribution, which can have a little neurodevelopment delay. So on top of that, I would not give a second dose of steroids, which is again going to cause further trouble. 1 dose would be fairly sufficient for an IUGR baby, because the lungs are definitely going to be more mature in this baby.
So in IUGR babies, and as we know in pre-eclampsias, there is always a better lung development compared
definitely.
to the
So second dose, you can definitely hold it back.
Hold on.
Unless we are dealing with twins or chorioamnitis, probably those are different story. Whereas in IUGR, second dose is always not recommended, and definitely it's after discussion with the parents.
Yes. Again, as we were discussing about the last case, for example, there is always this dilemma whether because there is chorioamnitis and steroids to be given or not. Because does giving steroids increase the chorioamnitis? This is one thing. But as per the recommendations, steroids are better given rather than holding on, because yes, with chorioamnitis itself, there is a risk for the baby. So give them steroids so that they have this advantage, and treat the chorioamnitis of the mother is the better
Exactly. This
option.
is a very important take-home message where chorioamnitis is not a contraindication for antenatal steroids.
Yes, because these are the real dilemmas. Steroids are increasing the chance of infection. Do we give them or not is the question. So it is better to be given as what is the recommendation. So this
So the
patient,
same
coming back to
patient.
this patient, yes, 1 week later, she is 30 weeks now. The growth, all the parameters are less than percentile now, so it's a clear-cut FGR. The Leica is dropped, oligohydramnios. The Doppler is showing umbilical artery absent end-diastolic flow, no reversal as of now. MCA is showing redistribution. Ductus venosus, aortic isthmus, and umbilical veins are normal. So now there is an ominous sign, and here is when, yes, do we deliver them? When do we deliver the baby, and mode of delivery? Umbilical artery absent end-diastolic flow recommends definitely explanation to the patient, but here still we would wait for one more day to wait till any changes in the ductus venosus happens. Ductus venosus A wave changes are the time when we have to deliver them. Umbilical artery absent diastolic flow is not the point when we have to deliver them, particularly because the baby is very small. It's just 30 weeks. If it were to be 35 weeks, there is this late onset IUGRs where in this 34, 37 weeks window, whenever there is absent end-diastolic flow, it is the time when we can think of, okay, delivering them, giving them the advantage that fetus is not going for a hypoxia till the ductus venosus changes happen. But here, even 1 day, 2 days extra for the baby is advantageous, so we would hold on till this and do a daily basis dopplers. Daily CTGs are what is done. Second question, role of steroids and magnesium sulfate, as we've discussed in detail on the steroids and magnesium sulfate. Yes. Do we wait
So
for the steroids and magnesium sulfate?
yes, madam. So can you give me the timeline? Okay, now absent end diastolic flow. What is the timeline where you can wait on this Doppler
One,
changes?
here we definitely give them steroids and magnesium sulfate.
So
See,
you
till
can
the
wait up to
Dopplers were
24 hours.
normal, we were holding on to give steroids, but absent end-diastolic flow starts, we give them steroids, we give them magnesium sulfate, because we know we are going to deliver them in few days, and do a
Yes,
daily basis.
daily.
Daily basis
So you
Dopplers.
can wait at least 24. Now, it's the same timeline. If there is a ductus venosus changes, how many hours do you give, or do you
I think
wait?
whenever there is ductus venosus changes, we do a continuous monitoring. Maybe if you have not given magnesium sulfate, give them 6 hours and deliver them. If you have already given
Okay.
magnesium sulfate, deliver them.
Okay, so I mean, it's the absent end-diastolic flow probably got a 24 hours window, whereas any ductus venosus changes, you're just talking about hours just for the steroids and Maxilf, if at all.
So,
Am I right?
if it will not, yes, sir, very much true. This
If
is
they
the
have not
time.
completed. Yes, yes. So now coming on to long-term
Long
outcomes
term.
in IUGR neonates, because parents always have a worry because all along the baby is not grown, and now the baby is born early also. So is it a double impact on the baby? So do I give up on the baby? Because this is a huge decision the parents have to take. Well,
True.
in this era where the neonatology has improved, now 10, 15 years before, severe IUGR, we used to take, okay, this baby is going to have more severe neurodevelopment outcome. But in this era where nutrition is optimized, in fact, we use something called as aggressive parental nutrition. Now, an IUGR, the neonatal parents, we would call as fetal malnutrition. But now we use aggressive parental nutrition, where after birth, we give enough proteins and fat, which helps the baby to catch up a little faster. So the graph here is actually the intrauterine growth monitoring chart, where you see that we try to reach the intrauterine growth parameters, though it's tough to reach that, but at least we reach somewhere close to where they're supposed to reach. And we also give aggressive enteral nutrition, balancing the risk of NEC. So in a growth restricted baby, the only worry is not about the brain, it's about the gut. If the baby is able to tolerate milk feeding, especially the breast milk feeding, they have an absolute normal neurodevelopmental outcome. So in our unit, we have a strong lactational support. So more own mother's milk is more, which in turn prevents the risk of NEC. With good parental nutrition, these babies do as good as a baby who's well grown. So IUGR alone is not an indication for poor neurodevelopmental outcome in this era. So this is what I want to stress to all the obstetricians. Once the baby is born with all the necessary precautions in terms of neuroprotection, once the first week and the 2 weeks in terms of feeding and parental nutrition is fine, these babies do amazingly well. And
Yes.
this is one more thing,
That's
is one more
nice.
parameter which we all follow. It's called developmental supportive care, where this we nest the baby, good pain management, and kangaroo mother care. These play a huge role in
Very
good
much.
neurodevelopmental outcome. Okay, so this baby is going to do well. The parents has to be optimistic. So now coming to the one more case scenario, which always
Just
interests
on
me as a
the note,
neurologist. Yes, ma'am.
whenever,
Yes, ma'am.
even when we tell about all these, discussions and counseling and all that, at 28 weeks, when we start talking them about IUGRs and tell them this can be the thing or baby can be small and all, at the end of the discussion, parents ask, everything is going to be all right, no, doctor?
Yeah.
Some,
In fact,
because we have to always deal with two sets of patients, one set of patient who is extremely worried, the moment you tell IUGR, they'll, read too much about IUGR, think that, NSU for 1 month and all those things. And the other set of patients, where you tell all these things and the neonatal discussion also has happened, and they tell us everything is going to be all right, no, doctor. So
yeah, that's
this is the thing, we have to always sit with them and make them understand and understand them also. It's important
exactly. So
always.
in fact, yeah, as you said, finally a team approach always gives a good outcome. And for the especially the confidence of the parents is better when we have a
Your voice
team
is not
outcome.
heard. Hmm.
Yeah. In
Yes, very
fact,
much. Team discussion
ultimately, when
always is important.
team discussion gives a good outcome, and the confidence of the parents is huge when it comes to a
Yes,
team discussion.
yes, very much true,
So
sir.
this is a third case which
Third case.
always is a diagnostic challenge. Okay, this is a gravida 2 mother who had
Yes.
unfortunately lost her. Hello.
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yes, madam.
I'm,
Yeah, you can get
I'm
the slides.
audible.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, yes. So now it's audible.
Yes. Keep going.
So this patient, previously IUD at 35 weeks and now 34 weeks. Dopplers are normal. When do we deliver them? They have this worry that 35 weeks, should I deliver? Or the opposition also feels, let us not cross, this whole thing is there. Previous IUD 35 weeks, let me deliver 34 weeks, 6 days. No, this is not the case. If the Dopplers have been normal with the monitoring on, and the patient has to monitor the fetal movements and all that, the delivery has to be planned at 37 weeks. Steroids, yes, give them steroids, tell them all the pros and cons, and deliver them at 37 weeks, because delivering at 35 weeks is definitely preterm. So it's not to be advised. If this mother wants an elective cesarean section at 36 weeks, if they're insisting, they have to understand the risks with a preterm delivery. 36 weeker is still a preterm. 37 weeks is when the ideal delivery has to be done. So they have to be counseled to pull on, to hold on till 37 weeks. And if they still are insisting, then yes, maybe with a consent, we can deliver them at 36 weeks in elective cesarean section. Is there a role for
So
antenatal steroids in late
yeah.
preterm?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
so this is a recent concept where even in late preterm, using steroids prevents the respiratory mobility. In fact, some of the late preterms end up in the NICU for a day or two. So using antenatal steroids, we can get away with this small NICU stay also. So any elective cesarean section less than 37 weeks, we can give a dose of antenatal steroids, is definitely a must. Now, this is
So it's
the last
12,
question.
12 mg, one dose is 24 mg is what you mean.
Yes. So 12
Yes,
mg, beta means it's 12 mg, 24 hours apart. If it's DEXA, it's 6 mg, 12 hours apart.
6
You
mg
give it for 4
per
doses.
dose.
Yes.
Yes, sir. And what do you
So, yes.
think about between steroids between 37 weeks to 39 weeks, sir?
So
Because
the
elective
recommendation
cesarean
says that
section,
up to 39 weeks, if it's going to be elective cesarean section where the mother is not in labor, still steroids are recommended. Now, there's a huge controversy in these numbers. The reason is if we are abroad in UK, Canadian, and the American guidelines say you give the dose of steroids, whereas still there are a lot of studies in India which says that when we give steroids, the risks of neonatal sepsis is a little on the high. So here it is always a gray zone. Where 37 to 39, you can take an informed decision from the parents, whereas we don't insist at 37 to 39 for all patients. But if it's going to be a diabetic, whereas the chances of a mild RDS is there, then probably you can give a dose of steroids. Otherwise, yes, there is an advantage. Okay. So
yes,
yeah. So this is the last question.
What is late pre-neonate units, sir? Yes, these are the tricky ones. As you always tell, the late preterms are the tricky neonates. Yes, tell us about.
Yeah, that's because according to parents, these babies mostly will be 2.3, 2.4 kg, where they should have crossed the 2.5 mark. They should be 2.3, 2.4, and they're close to 36, where 37 is what everybody thinks is term. So these are the borderline. So parents all have a very optimistic view. But this is what the American guidelines say, that any baby who's 34 to 37, we call them as late preterm. And here, anybody who's 34 plus 6 days also, they behave more like a 34 weeker. Similarly, just because they are 35 and 6, we don't call them a 36 weeker. It's more like a 35 weeker. And here we still find that there is a threefold higher risks among these babies compared to a term baby. Now, what are the risks? As I told you, one is the respiratory morbidity, that is a transient tachypnea of newborn. So the parents have to understand, okay, they insist that 37, I want an elective section. They have to understand that there may be a rare chance the baby may need a few hours of NICU stay. But more importantly, the second and the third and the fourth boxes is very important. The chance of hypoglycemia and feeding difficulties, because the baby may look a little big, where the mother assumes, okay, the baby is going to drink well, but it may have a little feeding difficulty, which may have hypoglycemia, which is going to have a long-term neurodevelopmental delay. So as obstetricians, they have to anticipate that these babies can have hypoglycemia, and any rounds they do for a 36, 37 weeker, the obstetrician also should stress on the lactation part, and within the first 24 hours to monitor the sugars and watch out for any signs of hypoglycemia, because what they say is hypoglycemia is the biggest preventable cause of neurodevelopmental delay, because the other causes like a preterm birth or a Down syndrome cannot be prevented, whereas a hypoglycemic event can be prevented. So a late preterm, the obstetrician as well as neonatologist should both as a team should monitor the baby and also keep the mother in the same loop. So they should watch if needed. Exactly, and the parents should be explained that these are the complications. If there is slight index of suspicion, the baby may need an NICU just for a few transition of a few hours. So it's the birth weight which is not going to give us the confidence. It's more about the gestational age. Just because the baby is crossed 2.5, it doesn't mean that the baby is safe. Okay. So we have to educate the doctors as well as all the healthcare workers, that is the nurses, the pediatrician, as well as
2.5, 2.6 babies which are late preterms where people can become complicit. They are big.
Exactly.
It'll be okay kinds and all that.
Exactly. Okay. So now the only balance here is, now if the baby needs just few hours of NICU stay, what happens is, do we breastfeeding versus the safety of the neonate? Because early grooming and early breastfeeding has a huge psychological impact and ensure that lactation falls in place. So what we do in our unit is, even if the baby has a little bit of late preterm and it needs a little NICU stay, what we do is we start the skin to skin care immediately at birth. The baby takes the first feed. Monitoring is done in the NICU, but baby comes for the feeding to the mother's side. And slowly, once we know that the baby is safe, it gets roomed in. So we have to balance the safety of the baby versus the lactation related issues. So counseling and lactation support is the crux in these kind of late preterm babies. So at the end of, this session, I think we'll just take it like a one-liners, where each of the things we discussed, I would like Madam also to stress on what are the take-home points. So, Madam, when it comes to a PPROM with chorioamnitis,
with the chorioamnitis setting in, when the signs of chorioamnitis is there, give them steroids, give magnesium sulfate, and deliver them. Till that point, do an expectant management. That is the thing you have to remember always in PPROM.
And
so neonatal role in extreme preterms, Antibiotic, yes. Antibiotic has to be given. Erythromycin is the drug of choice, and augmentin is better to be avoided.
Yes. So when it comes to extreme preterm, the neonatologist will get involved so that the neonatal team is prepared, and the parents also take part in a shared decision making, because that plays a huge role in relieving their stress levels, and also an important stress on the golden hour management. That is, the first 1 hour is very important, as well as the antenatal neuroprotection in terms of antenatal steroids, antenatal magnesium sulfate, and the delayed cord clamping at birth. These are things which has to be stressed. So, madam, what do you think about the timing of markers for the trisomy?
Yes. As we stressed, as such also for that matter, when it comes to double marker and the NT scan, we have to clearly tell them when they have to do it. There is no role for triple marker test, and between 14 and 15.6 weeks, there is no test which can be done. Quadruple marker has to be done, preferably between 16 weeks to 19 weeks 6 days. And then if required, NIPT has to be done only whenever it is required, and then informed decision is taken by the patients. And NIPT on overall basis, whenever there is a high risk of for example, previous Down syndrome or previous abnormal babies and all that, NIPT can be offered to them. It does not mean that NIPT has to be offered only whenever there is a high risk of Down syndrome or a high risk on double marker or quad. NIPT can be done at the outset also, as per the recent UK guidelines.
Right.
So the next is IUGR. When to deliver?
What do you think about the timeline when to deliver based upon the Doppler changes?
Important monitoring tools when it comes to IUGR is the Doppler indices, CTGs, and biophysical, BPPs parameters are not of much choice. The umbilical artery Dopplers play a major role. Whenever there is absent end-diastolic flows, monitor the ductus venosus. Whenever there is abnormalities in that, deliver them. Take time to give steroids and magnesium sulfate and deliver them.
Good. So when it comes to the risk of neurodevelopment delay for IUGR, now in this era, when parental nutrition and the aggressive lactation support, which ensures that breast milk of the mother is available, these IUGR babies do well if the start is good. They are on par to babies who are grown well also. So next one, madam, when there is a previous IUD, the parents are very worried. When do you recommend them to deliver?
They're very much apprehensive, but does not mean that we deliver them at the point when the previous IUD happened. Monitor them, monitor the Dopplers, tell them the GDM, for example, if GDM is there, the sugar control has to be good, and deliver them at 37. 37 is the right time to deliver them.
Very valid point, because the confidence of obstetrician ensures that the mother's anxiety level comes down, and she may go to 37, 38 weeks also. So here the obstetrician,
it's not ideal to deliver a late preterm just because there was an IUD before.
So yeah, that's when the experience of obstetrician comes in, giving the confidence to the mother that she can pull it through this time. So steroids in late preterm, definitely it's indicated, especially less than 37 weeks. It ensures that the respiratory morbidities are lesser, so that the small NICU stay for any TTN or those things also gets reduced. And last, outcomes of late preterm, they definitely do well, but this is one cohort which needs more stringent monitoring in the first 24 to 48 hours, especially stressing on the feeding issues and ensuring that there are no hypoglycemic events, and monitoring the sugars in the first 24 to 48 hours. So that it is the role of obstetricians and the pediatrician and the nurses, everybody as collective has to keep the parents in the loop. So yes, madam, anything else you want to add to this?
I think these are the crux of the discussion. Basically, these are the challenges and the day-to-day dilemmas which every obstetrician, every neonatologist, pediatrician would face. And as we stressed, I think a team effort is always important when it comes to a decision making with obstetrics.
Okay. So obstetrician as well as the pediatrician who have any other doubts, I mean any healthy discussion, we are available, and Dr. Saravanan madam is also available. Please reach out to us, and we would also like to get your feedbacks about this session, because we try to make it as interactive and as practical oriented as possible. Okay. Thank you, madam. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Thanks everybody.
Thank you everybody. Thanks a lot.